right? So this will go on our website. This is going to be something which we allow people to watch on a regular basis. In a virtual world, we're learning that giving people access on times that are not typical, you need to find your way to get resources. And so thankfully you're available now to do this synchronously, but we also want to offer for those who couldn't show up the option to get some of the content. So welcome. So there's a little thing at the bottom of your screen that if you move down, it says reactions. I just want to know people are actually here. So if you want to go down, if you want to click either the thumbs up or the wave, I think, or clap, I'm not sure what that is, that lets me know that you're here, you hear me, you see what's going on. Nancy and Aaron, I don't see anything. Maybe they'll pop, maybe they, you know, took a small break and they'll be right back. If not, that's okay. I'll move forward. Most of you are here. You heard me and you interacted, so I appreciate that. So this is effective facilitation in the virtual world. And so just to give you a snippet, we're going to talk about what is facilitation, working with groups and what is a group exactly, experiential learning, and then we'll talk about what are virtual tools you have access to right at your fingertips, especially because you have an EDU account. Aaron, nice thumbs up, I love it. And so that should give you some unique mechanisms to use. We'll also do some activities, polls, and really I want you to think about all the different things I'm doing that you could steal. Like this is not mine, I didn't make all of these. These are things that I hope you could extract for yourself in the experiences you're gonna need to do. And I'm more than happy to share all the resources. When this is uploaded as a video, there'll be links to the different accounts I use, the different tools, right? So, and we'll also give you some more 4A's virtual facilitation tips. And so you'll give I'll give you all those things post this program. This is also the first of many Let's Talk Leadership experiences, so thank you for participating in the first one. But on that regard, I need to send you this link in chat. And this is just for our attendance purposes. So if you could take a moment, click that. I believe you need to log in with your NetID. It's through UContact. And when you go through that process, it just lets us know that you participated in this experience. And then allows us to send you, at least this is the link I was sent, so let me know if it doesn't work. I might need to follow up with you afterwards. And so at the end of this, you'll also receive a survey that we hope we get some feedback about whether or not this workshop was worthwhile for you. And if not, what are some things that we could change or adapt for future workshops? All right, so I'm gonna ask you to use the reaction thing again if the link works and you get to it and it's functional. Okay, so it's not working for a few people. All right, so I'll just at the end share it again, and maybe that'll be different at a different point in time. Maybe it's a browser thing. But if it's not working for you, just make sure you put it in chat, because then I could follow up with you specifically. Awesome. All right, so we're gonna get moving because it's already 3:09 and we only have another 51 minutes. And so first things first, I'm gonna start sharing screens, and so know that the screen's gonna move around. But I want to showcase some things about sharing screens because I think it's important, because people forget you could do more than just share. And so first I'm going to share my screen one. Right, so you could currently see all of this, right? Defining facilitation, all my notes. I don't like using full screen share. I actually like using the browser. And the reason for that is because in the browser, you're allowed to only share what's within that browser. Right now, if I'm sharing my full screen, you see my little toolbar at the bottom, all the links I have, the time, which is extra space on the screen that you don't need to use. And so I personally like to use the browser about whatever I want to specifically share first and what we could go back to and move around. Another big piece about sharing is that you have the option to pause the share. So probably you can't see my mouth move or anybody moving right now because I paused the screen. So at any point in time as a facilitator, you need to change things on the fly, like you have a misspelling in your presentation, you know that's coming up, or like you're like, oh, I opened the wrong document. You could pause that screen share and then move whatever you need to wherever you like have people looking at, and then reshare that screen. And then you unpause. When you unpause, right, so a pause, it turns a little play mark, you press the play, and it goes right back to the screen you were on before. And nobody knows the difference other than everything's paused. So if you don't have anybody's faces on the screen, no one's gonna notice that there was any difference of when you're doing the presentation. So it's a nice little facilitator breathing moment, right? So if you need a moment in which you're like, oh, I just need to change what's on that screen, you could pause. And you could also just share different screens as you go. And so that's just one way to facilitate an experience in the way that you want people to see things. It's almost like controlling your environment when you're in person. Right now, I want to control the environment of what screen you see. And so right now, you should see purple background that says effective facilitation in the virtual world. If I could get head nods from people, is that okay? So I am learning how to use this effectively, right? So no, it's just one of those things that sometimes I have a dual monitor, and so I need to recognize it says one thing on my right side, but another thing on my left side. And so I always like to check. One of the big things in the facilitation I'm learning virtually is that you need to ask more questions. You need to get a lot more confirmations to people. That's why I use the reactions a lot so that I can know that somebody is hearing what I'm saying and they're seeing what I need them to see. All right, so here's another fun thing. We're gonna interact right off the bat. And I don't know who's in this room, right? We have a good chunk of people. And so what I want you to do, if you scroll up to the top of the screen, you'll have a couple things that pop up. There's a thing that says annotate. And then under annotate is a toolbar, and I think it pops up in your left. Some people had it at the top. From there, there's a thing called stamp. If you take the stamp, you could then literally mark the screen that's being presented on. And so what I want you to do, oh, look, there you go, already doing it. So I would like people to start checking where they're at and then who they are. And maybe even like, are you currently in a leadership role? Is this maybe something you learn, like you're doing this because it's maybe part of the work that you might be doing professionally, as like you're getting paid to do it, seeking new skills, right? Is anybody here new at facilitation? Like you haven't done it yet, but you want to make sure that you can, and so you're coming to this, or anything else. Oh, somebody drew. Okay, didn't like the stamp.
I'm a little confused on how exactly to do this.
So if you move your mouse, I believe to the top of the screen, there's a little bar that pops down that says annotate. There's other options. Let's see if I'm going to do a quick little swap of screens. Right? So if you move up, right, you'll see different things here. You won't have as many because you're not the host or presenting, but there's a little marker here that says annotate. When you click that, you have a toolbar that pops up. I think yours is on the left. And you'll have a thing called a stamp, and you could choose what stamp you want. And as you people putting question marks on the screen. So this is just a really easy way to, if you don't like having to jump between different softwares or different websites, you can have people literally write all over your screen. The problem though is that sometimes if you don't control that, then people will make notes as you're presenting when you don't want them to make notes. So you can also clear drawings. You can save what people put down as notes. But you could also, when you go to more as a host, you could disable participant annotation. So right now you cannot use any of those, or you shouldn't. Cool. So it seems that most people are undergraduates in stores or that's the region which they're currently their campus. I don't know who's actually on campus, who are taking in-person classes. And mostly people are looking to seek new skills. So hopefully this is going to be working for you. Hopefully you already learned some things about annotating, because that's what it seems was very new for some people. And so we're going to move forward. I like to use polls in my experiences in virtual. So there's multiple options for you to do this. You could either use your phone, use your web browser, and you could join via slido.com. It'll ask you for a participant number, which is 1816. From here, I just want to know, I like to take the temperature of the room of where people are at. This is the first week of classes. Some people might have been quarantining on campus for the last 2 weeks and might have had their first in-person class, which is, a thing in itself. But it's a new semester for most. And so I just want to know how people are feeling. Nice. Okay. Since those all came in at the same time, I think one person are all of those. And I get that. It's a lot of feelings right now. Okay. All right, so we got only 6 responses. Nice. Oof, overwhelmed. I would be lying if I didn't tell you that myself and my fellow colleagues in our office are also feeling some of these. And I think that's where some of this is coming up. Some of these words are like typical conversation points about how do we help students overcome being overwhelmed. We're all anxious too, and so what do we do to interact with that? But I love that there's such a high level of hopefulness too. I think that's a good sign that we're in a good place, and I'm also very hopeful for all of you to have a successful virtual experience and hopefully some in-person stuff when we get the opportunity to. But we're in a moment where everybody's dealing with this larger scale thing, and that's the pandemic. So don't avoid it. Don't act like it's not real. Don't act like it's not part of what's happening. And so recognize that that's the reality and move forward. A lot of times I'm finding that my colleagues are just saying, well, we're just going to do it. We're not going to talk about it. No, it's real. Recognize it. And I think as a facilitator, it makes the experience much more authentic, right? So just make sure that you check in on people, right? The fact that we're hopeful and anxious are the top two, I think is good, because anxious means that you care about what's happening. And then that just impacting you as you go through the experience. It's all new. It's different. But hopeful is also good. There's a good range of stuff. A little sad about the preparedness, but how do you prepare for something as unique as this? So it's reality. So hopefully here's some more tools to make it easier. So what exactly is facilitation, right? We've already spent 17 minutes in this space, and I have yet to actually give you a definition. What is it? What is it not? When is it appropriate to use, right? And so facilitation is all around the world, right? There's things that are happening on a very regular basis. This is a facilitation. If you're in a meeting and somebody is guiding the process, that's a facilitation. If you're running a ropes course and you're climbing over different obstacles and people are giving you rules and expectations, that's a facilitation. Even some teaching could be facilitation, but sometimes it's not. That time where somebody's literally just writing on a chalkboard, there's no discussion, there's no experience, they're just giving you information. And for me, I do not define that as facilitation, that is just giving you information. Typically, in my experience, and we'll touch more about this a little bit further on, is that you actually have to participate in something for it to be facilitated. And so that's kind of the approach of the learning. But my question I typically ask when we do these kind of experiences, what makes facilitation good? And so I want you to think about maybe an experience or something that you participated in the past or even recently that you just knew that this was effective, it was good, and you're going to remember this, right? And so I want you to think about that, hone in on that, or a couple of them that you've participated in. And we have yet another way in which you could participate in this experience. Hopefully you already have that browser open. It's the same exact thing. And so I want you to write a word or two or a small sentence about what are the main components of a good facilitation. Okay, yep. Okay, listening to others, engagement popped up a handful of times, participation, community, relevant. I like that. Listening is also super important, right? The fact is, I want to know what you're thinking, and this is my way in a virtual world to try to listen. It's much more difficult to have that conversation on a larger scale workshop in the virtual space, but there's definitely methods to do that, and this is one tool to do so. Okay, engaging every person. Right, we have a thing called, what is it called? Brain-based learning, right? We all have multiple ways in which we learn in our spaces, and so you have to use different ways in engaging people, and so that's one way of trying to understanding all your members, understand those who are participating, engaging everybody, sometimes takes many different methods. Okay. Yeah, these are all wonderful. I completely agree is that you need to seek out, be enthusiastic about what you're doing. It has to be something very relevant. And so this is great. Thank you for sharing. All right, so let's define it. We're finally at that juncture. The actual term for facilitation means to make things easier, make learning easy. It does not mean that it will be easy. It just means that the process in which you're guiding the individuals or the group through that experience is easier because you created a process, organized it, or maybe gave another method of getting to that place. I run a challenge course. And if somebody says you facilitate challenge course, that means it's easy. I would almost laugh at you because there's no way the word challenge is in it. I only say that because this term makes people think, oh, it'll be easy. And so I just want you to like really hone in. Facilitation is the guide, an experience that's easier to navigate. And that's that intentional piece. You want to approach learning that's grounded in the experience, right? I remember I was already talking about earlier about teaching. If there's no back and forth, no interaction, no actual experience, then that's not facilitation. That is just me telling you things or somebody telling you things. And one of the big pieces that we, at least in the leadership or develop area in student activities things, is that you need to reflect on the experience you had in order to make connections to either your role, the organization, yourself, and what it applies to in your future. And so for us, defining that facilitation is really, you have to be prepared and you have to experience it and you need to think about it and reflect on it. And again, it's to make the process easier. Okay, so there's a couple tools. I'm gonna pause the screen for a second because I need to move something around. And so there's expert power, right? And so I kind of talked about that earlier without actually defining it. Okay, we're back. So expert power, this is the traditional paradigm that you're probably used to in the classroom environment. There is a person who is supposedly the expert, who is in a position of power, who is giving you their expertise in return for you to learn from them, to listen to them, and be in a dynamic experience where you're going to seek them out for that expertise. And sometimes a facilitation can be that. If I'm teaching somebody how to belay a technical rope to be safe when somebody climbs a 40-foot span, that I hope they're listening to me and the expertise that I have, the years of practice, and that traditional paradigm works in that specific facilitation. They're still doing hands-on, they're still learning, that's what keeps it facilitation. But you need to create a dynamic in which that position of power and expertise is a component of how you facilitate. Now, if it's where you're trying to have a dialogue and reflect, sometimes you want to move away from that process or that approach and not be the expert. A lot of times you'll hear you want to be at the same level as other people. You want to sit down with them, be at the same eye level, and remove some of those power dynamics of being the older person or the position in a role or just the perceived position of power. The reason for that is because it limits people's participation sometimes, especially if you're asking deeper level questions in your experience, or you're asking them to do something new for themselves outside of their comfort zone. You don't want to push them in a way just because you're in a position of power. So it's just something to consider both ends. Do you bring the expertise, or do you want to remove that power that people perceive? And sometimes if you want people to participate in the experience a different way, you need to level out that dynamic. And so that's just a consideration about what it means to have expert and power. Now, my two that I like to use very often is the Socratic method and the mirror window method of facilitators approach. So if you took any philosophy course, you've definitely heard many notions of what the Socratic questioning process is. It's trying to get at the core, the why. And so you just continually ask questions to get at the core reasoning of why somebody might do something. If we just ran an experience, I said, so what did this mean to you? Or what did you learn? What did you take away? And someone says communication, and they leave it at just communication. I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to then say, what do you mean by communication? And if they say, we communicate better, I'm going to ask again, what does it mean to communicate better? And so just getting to that level of actually extracting something worthwhile to take away. One-word answers just are not effective. Going two-word answers after answer the one-word answer isn't also effective. And so the Socratic method is really just digging deeper in how you connect the things you're doing in the facilitation to what it applies to afterwards. And now mirror window for me, I think is a good tool, mechanism, or framework for you to think about. If you have a mirror, you're doing a non-judgmental reflection back at somebody, almost like paraphrasing what they say. If someone's, well, I didn't enjoy that. And so you say, okay, what of that did you not enjoy? And literally just saying, here's the mirror, you said this, what does that mean? And that's just one way to think about it, is reflecting back just what somebody else is saying or somebody else is doing. And then the window is that you are creating what people see through the window. And so there's a way to bring in metaphors, there's a way to talk about, well, this is the experience, and so here's the window I want you to look through, or many people use the word lens, right? Have you thought about it in this lens? And so this is just a method of having a conversation about what facilitation means or what experience they're going through, either reflecting back at them or creating a window for them to look through. And then the last thing that I want you to think about is co-facilitation. If you are not working alone, everybody has a different method in which they do things. And I know that you all have group work in your classes. You've experienced some people do more, some people do less. Maybe you never have a real conversation about who's supposed to do what, and it just haphazardly happens. So if you know that you're going to be working with somebody in some type of facilitation, I'm going to encourage and suggest that you talk with the person prior, you plan and be intentional about how you interact. I have some co-facilitators that I work with who don't mind me just jumping in, whereas others would be very mad at me if I just said, hey, what about this? And add something to something that they're doing because they're like, I got this. And so you just need to understand who you're working with because everybody is different in their style. And so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you the option to annotate again. I want you to circle, dot, whatever you need to do, what you think you might use more often. And if it's between two, feel free to dot two. Nice. I love that there's so many co-facilitation. The heart. I always forget there's a heart. Okay, wide range. I think it's interesting that there's so many of you who put co-facilitation down. If I find that there's a generational gap from my experiences between those who like to do things on their own and those who like to do things with others. And I love that there's a lot more people who want to work with one another in this space right now, because I think it's just easier to have somebody along with you to support each other. So I think that's a great thing to think about, is like, how do you design your facilitations to be able to support through a facilitation process? All right, I'm going to clear it all, stop you from being able to annotate again. We're going to move forward. So Kurt Lewin in 1943 wrote something. He's a behavioral scientist. Some people would know him from experiential ed if you're doing anything in NEAG. If not, basically, this is an equation he came up with about how behavior of a person in a group is the function of their environment, right? And so what is the environment? What can you do within that space to control, or at least guide, right? Facilitate, make the process intentional and easier, and help their behavior go into the place that you want it to go. So helping that function happen. You can't control a person, you can't control the choices they make, but you have access to control the environment. And right now that's that square that we're in, rectangle, whatever space, the screen. How can you control this environment we're in to help the behavior, how you want them to function through that space, right? So there's another way to think about, and again, I'll share this presentation later. So you're more than happy to use this and take it with you post-workshop. And so as you progress, I don't know your groups. I don't know what they're about right now, all right? And I just assess that you're here to learn some skills, and that most of you are in stores. But some things to consider as you're developing this, right? There was possibly 30 some odd people who are going to be participating in this online workshop, which changes when there's possibly only 5 people participating in this online workshop. If there's only 5 of you, I could easily spend some time talking with you individually. When there's 30, I need to adapt to that group size. You need to also understand time together. How long are they coming together weekly, semesterly, annually? Are they only doing a one-time workshop like this right now? Because that impacts how much you could do with them. Why are they a group, and why are they participating in this, right? I did a little temperature check at the beginning. You're probably all coming from different places, of different groups. But getting to that why, and why somebody's motivated to be there, will help you be intentional in how you provide that experience or information. And then roles within a group matter, right? So some of that expert power comes out based on what role you might be in. Are you the president? Are you just somebody who likes to come to things, or you like to support? So that's that formal versus informal, right? Formally, you have a position. Informally, you're a senior, and so you role model and you help support your peers. Right? So those all matter and influence the dynamics of your group. And that is what leads to norms, behaviors, and expectations. What is the environment in which that group functions in? And so we're going to quickly go over this one. This is much more in depth, but there's a theory that Tuckman created about how groups go through different stages. We form, we storm, we norm, perform, and adjourn, right? That's super, yeah, supposedly this is what every group goes through no matter what. You have to come together for a reason, whether that's a class, whether that's a group organization you join, whether that's staff, right? A group has to start somewhere. And maybe every time a new person comes onto the staff, a new hire, that's a different way of forming. Conflict arises typically in a group. That's that storming process. You're learning about each other. You're not super comfortable yet to talk about what matters truly. And maybe you're still trying to get at the values of that group. Once you get past that, you could then norm. Like, what is, you always know that somebody walks in with a coffee, and so you know they have this coffee, and you're like, or you know this person always cracks jokes, or this individual is always going to show up early, or that you have a norm that no phones happen during your meetings, right? So these are just things that happen in your spaces, and that's the normal things that people value in your group. And once you're at this place, at peak performance, right? You're all good, you all value each other, respect the roles and dynamics, and you perform the goals you all came together for, and at some point that group's gonna go away, and that's a journey. Typically, it's talked about in this format from left to right. You form, storm, norm, perform, adjourn. That's not truly what happens. I don't know if you've ever had an experience mid-semester where somebody in one of your groups, small or large, decided they don't like somebody else in your group, and they're like, well, I'm gonna have some conflict, while the rest of the group seems perfectly fine in doing what they need to. And so this is just something to think about, is that as you go through your semester, as things happen in the world, as things happen in your group, they could go through a variation of these stages or back, right? So you could form, storm, go back to forming because that conflict just didn't get you anywhere. And maybe somebody leaves the group, or something else happened in the semester, or the group disbanded and so a new group formed. You might skip storming and go right to norming. Or you might form, perform, and see you later. Like, I find that happens a lot in volunteer groups. You all come together for something you all value already, so there's no conflict. And so you spend a day and you help clean up a community and then you leave. So that's forming, performing, and adjourning. And so that's just something to think about, is that even a small pocket in a group could be in a different place. The whole group could be in a different place. And then how you approach your facilitation matters based on where we're at. So if we're starting the semester like right now, and I just met this group, I'm not going to ask them to climb a 12-foot wall, right? I might build up to that experience at some point, but it's not going to happen when I first meet them. I'm also not going to ask about identity. I'm not going to ask them to do some crazy in-depth reflection that shares things that they're not comfortable yet doing. So you have to build up to that experience. So based on what you know about whatever group you're a part of right now, and if you're not part of a specific student org or staff, think about a class. What stage you believe your group is in at this moment right now? And this is a different form of polls, and that's why I had to pause to switch. I wanted to showcase that there's two different tools that you could use for polling, and that's Poll Everywhere or Slevo. I think I'll share it later. All right. Still see people typing, doing things. So you'll see that at the top, you have to go to pollev.com/MarkFlynn043, or you could text Mark Flynn 043 to 22333 and click whatever one that you want, A, B, C, D, or E. All right. And I'm going to guess a lot are in A, but we're going to find out. Okay. Sounds about right. We're at the beginning of the semester. Okay. I'm guessing the norming group is probably some people you've already known or you've worked with or have been part of, or you're just in a good spot really early. Yeah, there's no way that I would think that groups are performing super strongly week one into the semester. And so this makes very, like, a lot of sense about what's going on. But again, as you facilitate, you're planning to be intentional about whatever facilitation you do. Consider where the group might be. Are they new? And this is maybe something you might need to ask, or ask your group members, whatever group you're part of, where are we at? What can we do to get where we need to go to get to norming? And norming is building expectations and values of how you expect to show up. How do you hold yourself accountable? How do you hold others accountable? Awesome. Well, thank you. And we're going to talk a little bit about experiential learning, reflection, and then we'll talk tools of virtual environments. I know I shared a couple already, but I want to dig into a handful of others that you could steal from me. So experiential learning, right? I said that you had to actually experience and participate in something for it to be a facilitation. And that could be just be a discussion, or that could be physically in person or on a screen, right? Because we don't really have the capacity at the moment to do that. But you have to experience it. It's the process of developing knowledge and skills by being hands-on. It has to be active, has to incorporate ways to get the participants in it, right? I've been polling you, asking you to stamp things so that I know that you're here, thumbs up. Those are all just virtual tools that do the same things I would do in person. You must be able to reflect, and it doesn't have to be in that environment that you reflect on this, but it's even what I call planting a seed. If I ask you a question and you leave this experience and you're still thinking about it, then we did a good job experientially, because then you could still use what we've talked about in something in the future. And you need to be able to conceptualize it, right? So if I'm giving you a bunch of stuff that made no sense and you can't use it, then it's not a good facilitation, because it's not being intentional enough to be a skill development experience. And then typically in a team building experience or some type of development of skills, there's some problem solving that you want to incorporate, or a reflection in which you allow people to dig deeper about how they use those skills. And so this is a simple format of what Kolb came through. He's a researcher about experiential learning. Something happens concretely. Right now, this is this workshop. Reflective observations is you think about what has happened. Through that process of what you've experienced and reflected on, you can conceptualize something that matters. The why. Why are we here? What did I get from this? And then you could use that experience, those skills developed. And my hope is through this that you took some facilitation skills or knowledge, and you're going to use them in the future. And that's your active experimentation. For me, I'm still learning some of different tools about WebEx compared to Zoom. And every time I do that, I'm actively experimenting to be better at using these tools. And so it's a cycle. You go through this whole process and you start over, but with new skills and new experiences. But it's also a great tool, mechanism to reflect, right? And so the simple way of asking questions, did you do it? What did you do? So what? Like, why did it matter? And now what are you going to do with that information, that experience, right? So if you're somebody who's going to ask questions about a facilitation, reflect on something, this is the kind of the minimalist approach of engaging in a reflection. Is you're going to do something and ask what happened, why did it matter, or so what? It depends on how much attitude you want to give as a facilitator. So what? And then now what? Like, what matters now? Because a lot of times we miss that now what part. Right? We did something, we experienced it. Okay. And so applying it to something in the future is really that big piece that the learning occurs. And that's, I like to explain this as the difference between the adventure park down the road, which is you get to go by yourself, climb trees and go across stuff, compared to our team building experience at Four Arrows, where as a group, we ask you to do things, accomplish goals together, and then reflect on it. You don't get the what, so what, and now what from adventure park down the road. Recreation has its place. It's just not a learning environment. And so I know that I said this earlier about understanding your group and where they're at, but it also works very well for reflection. You move from low risk to high risk and ask open-ended questions, right? And when I say low risk, that's the concept of icebreakers. And if you have a sour taste in your mouth for the word icebreakers, the concept of icebreakers, that's most likely because somebody did an icebreaker incorrectly or at the wrong place. Right? So if you just entered a room, you just met each other, and then somebody says, get together, hold hands, and do the human knot, you didn't build up to get there yet, right? And so you want to build in low risk, like, do you like cats or dogs? Are you a night or morning person, right? And then as you engage in breaking down barriers, you could then ask higher risk questions. And then if you ask a question that can only be answered yes or no, that is not open-ended, and it really cuts off dialogue. Right? And so when you're reflecting, you want to ask something that allows for a discussion to occur. And sometimes it's just switching the first word to how, and that changes the entire question. How did you experience this instead of, did you like this experience? Right? Or if you ask a yes or no question, just add why afterwards. And so that's the simple, easy mechanisms to kind of switch it to open-ended. And I'm going to challenge you, as those who possibly will be facilitating for your peers or others in the future, you need to try to dig deeper. And that's the whole Socratic method I talked about earlier, is don't take one word answers unless that's what you're asking for. Ask people to get another layer. You're going to be working with adults. They could, right? So challenge them to be better people for themselves without actually like saying you need to be a better person, right? Don't degrade them, but ask them follow-up questions, and you stay interested. I find that I like this job so much because I don't know who's entering my space, and I don't know who's going to ask what or what experience they're bringing with them. And so their answers sometimes are like, what, how'd you come to that conclusion? Or like, what, you experienced this? And so I stay interested in this job and my experience and as a facilitator, because all of you bring unique experiences with you. So as a facilitator, you could stay interested in what people are sharing, which makes them stay more engaged. And the last big tool on reflection is that silence is key. As weird as that sounds, and it's slightly harder in virtual environments. I like to count to 10 in my head sometimes. If I ask a question and nobody says anything, I count to 10 in my head. If no one says anything, then I move forward. There's introverts that show up in these spaces, and so you don't know if they've had the time or the energy to really think about something. So that 10 seconds creates that gap of breathing space to then possibly answer a question. And typically somebody hates silence more than I do. And so they'll pop in and be like, well, I have this answer. And that'll probably happen with every space you're currently facilitating in. So this is just a quote alike. Experience in itself is neither productive nor unproductive. It is how you reflect on it that makes it significant or not significant. And that just goes back to the whole cycle that people could just tell you stuff, but that's not really facilitation. And if you don't reflect on it, it's not going to be important to you or apply to anything in your life. So before we move, the next whole section is all virtual stuff. But before you do that, I'd like you to think about one good question, maybe something somebody's asked you before. But type it out in chat. What is one really good reflection question that you maybe have in your repertoire or had somebody ask you beforehand? And when I screen share, I can't really see the chat. It pops up in a weird place. So I'll open that a little bit later. So one that I know that I go to is like, why is this important? Or what is important about this that you are able to take with you? And sometimes just that concept of importance that I sometimes get, it's not important. And that's okay, right? Understanding that that's where they're at. And so, yeah, I just want you to think about what are some good questions you could follow up with your peers or whoever you're facilitating for. Okay, so this is the fun stuff, right? We're in this space, and I don't think, and this is my own personal opinion, that we're leaving it anytime soon. And so we need to make the best of what we have available to us virtually. So knowing that everybody's in their own room or house, or they're with friends, family, they have significant others, or just roommates, or there's a dog, cat, right? So there's tons of things happening in spaces. Ooh, sorry about that. So there's going to be distractions. Someone's sound is unmuted, or their video is funky, or technology is happening, and a phone goes off, or somebody puts up a funky background in their Zoom call. There's going to be distractions, and so you need to just welcome them, and maybe even call them out in a joking way if that's your tool. Like I like to use humor. Sometimes make fun of myself to help others feel safe in the space. But know that virtually, because we're in our own personal places, there's a lot more distractions that are going to occur. So just welcome them. Virtually, everything is just a bigger puzzle. How many links need to be sent? What documents do you have available to you? And so try to simplify if possible. If you had something that took 20 slides, maybe make it 15, right? So how can you hone things in just a little bit more, be a little bit more concise, make things easier to access, right? That's that facilitation piece, guiding as easy as possible, but not making it easy. And knowing that everything takes longer. Everything takes longer virtually. People logging in, people showing up, people getting and using the tools, right? If we were in a physical space, I would have had Post-it notes for you to write on and post on a wall instead of annotating, whereas I had to describe, move your mouse here, click this, do that, get over here. And so everything in a virtual space just takes longer. Opening a browser, moving something around, learning the new technology. Some people aren't in Zoom as often, maybe they're in WebEx more or other format. And so as you go more virtual in facilitation, or you do it more often, just take that into account. Build in 5 extra minutes, build in 10 extra minutes, right? Depending on how much time you have available. And then attempt to think outside your frame. I know that we didn't do that this time around, but typically if I'm doing a team building workshop, I ask people to go get something and bring it back. Or I tell them to stretch or like move their arms around, or I have them actually get out of their seats and kind of like do stretches or jump or do some things we would do in person because, you know, camp style team building could be a little funny, but also silly in a good way. And so you could still do that. It just is in a different place. And so if you're in a facilitation, you're used to doing certain team building activities, just think about it differently, and that it's okay to ask people to move away from their frame, move back, move in, move around. Like you could tell people to put a hand up, put it over the other side, high five to their neighbor, right? You could do things still. And I just want you to think outside the box a little bit more. And I mean, literally, not just the figurative concept of, you know, think outside the box, be creative, but both. Be creative, but also don't limit yourself to this frame that you're in. You could ask people to do more, and more than likely, I would tell you from all the times I've already done it, they're going to show up and do it. If you're nice about how you facilitate, you say why you're doing it, and it's for a good reason, you could ask people to kind of step back and do a bit more physically as well as show up just on screen. And then one thing that I've already learned a lot is that you got to plan, test, and have a backup. I have this on 2 different presentation methods, and I have it on 2 different browsers just in case. I've tested if Zoom on my phone and on the laptop and on my desktop, and that's just my way of saying like, oh, I know this works. I also didn't know how, like I've never joined a Zoom on my phone, and so when I was planning facilitations in the past, I purposely joined my own Zoom on my phone, so I knew what happened when somebody was trying to go through my workshop. And so this is something to think about. Again, everything takes longer. When you design something in a virtual format, does the website work? Does the document work? Can you share it? Are the links correct? Where do you place these? How do people get those? And so just test it, have a backup plan. And then if something happens, what do you do if like your internet goes out? Do you have another date? Do you have another place? What is something you might be able to communicate in the future? And then just going virtual requires much more clear communication. I know I said earlier that you need to be more instructive. You need to basically be explicit in your directions and ask a lot more reactions, the thumbs up, the high five, the can you do this? Can you find this? Where is that? And so I know that in person, I don't have to do that as much because you could see it or you could feel it. Here, you actually have to be like, okay, move this here, go over here. You just have to be much clearer in what you expect people to do. And if you are gonna have people move around, jump around their room or space or go get something, I would say warn them just in case they need to have pants on or, you know, like could be considerate, or say, hey, turn off your camera and, you know, like we're going to do something soon. So feel free to get comfortable, right? So just communicate expectations of the people in that space. Because all too often I know that people aren't showing up like they would in a regular office space or environment. And so just make sure people are aware of what you want them to do when they come in. All right, so a couple things that I do want to, I know that I already talked about screen sharing. And I already showcased about the different methods using the browser, using a screen, pausing, playing, and switching. And so I just need you to know if you're going to be doing virtual facilitation, get comfortable with that. Test it out, move it around. Make sure that when you are screen sharing that you have things not open you don't want people to see. I recently had somebody have like the Backstreet Boys on their background, or New Kids on the Block remembrance tour or something, some old photos. And I was like, okay, right. So just consider what people might see when you end up clicking different links or move things around. Some could be inappropriate, but some could be funny, but also might not be what you want people to see. Another thing is that I want you to think about learning shortcuts in Zoom. There are certain buttons to stop people from talking, to mute them all. You could choose how you want people to interact in your environment, right? That function and behavior you want or expect. Learn their shortcuts, because then you could quickly stop them from taking over the virtual space, the audio, or even turning off people's videos or requesting different things. You have the ability to control your virtual environment even more so, I think, than in a physical environment. And so just think about those features you have. I know that there was a big conversation about Zoom issues with security features. I don't know if you've heard of the Zoom bombing that was happening or the inappropriate stuff that's happening on Zoom. There is a little shield. I'm gonna swap the share again, all right? It's just easier. Oop, there's the chats. All right, where is it? I'm actually gonna stop sharing. So at the bottom of my screen, I don't know why it's not letting me share that process. There's a little shield that almost looks like Windows Defender if you use Windows Defender on your computer, which is the forced one if you don't have another virus thing on your computer. It says security, and when you click it, you could lock a meeting. And so basically when you know that everybody who's supposed to be here is here, you could lock it, and therefore no one else could enter that space. And so that's a really good security mechanism if you're afraid that other random people are going to pop in, or you know that past 10 minutes of whatever facilitation you do, you're going to get deeper. And so you don't need people to show up because you created expectations and norms about how you want people to interact in that space. And so use that security function as the host to lock that meeting. And then the last big one is breakout rooms. If you have a large amount of people or you want to do 2 to 3 person groups to do some team building or breakout discussions, as a host, know that you should probably mess with your settings in your Zoom account or WebEx account. They both have some type of breakout space. You have to enable it. It's called breakout rooms. You enable it in your settings as a host. And when you host a meeting, you then have an option, which is like 4 little blocks. And you could choose to create as many rooms as you need and then automatically or manually place people in rooms. When you create the room, you could send messages to everybody. And then you could also have somebody move between rooms if you need to. And so it's just a nice way of saying, hey, I need you to go to this space and have a conversation, and we'll come back together. And when you close that room, they get 60 seconds to come back to this space, the main area. And so that's just a really good mechanism to use when you don't have the ability to say, hey, go to this room and have a discussion and come back. But we have that option virtually. And then I have one last section to talk about on, there it is, this. So going virtual requires learning some tools. Oops. Right, so in this specific presentation, I use both Poll Everywhere and Slido. Slido was the first 2 polls that we did where there was a word cloud and there's little things that come across when we asked about how you're feeling. That's a way to integrate, but no, you have to download an extension on your browser and have an account you log into. Same thing at Poll Everywhere, you have to have another extension for that. But I think they're really cool mechanisms. I keep using the word mechanisms. It's a really good way to engage somebody and see it happening on the screen. There's not a lot of other major options available. If you find them cool, please share. But I like to use those because they look visually good and they function well in comparison to a lot of other tools that I've had to utilize in the past. If anything though, you could continuously use the annotation on the Zoom account. So I would just say, if you're not going to use these, you could just have people annotate, highlight, click, move around right on the screen. Okay. If you also want to make things look nice, I would say search for royalty-free stuff, right? Don't take other people's work unless they say that's allowed to be taken. And so there's some really good websites like Pixel Bay, I want to say. Or again, I'll link these to when we upload this document and we share out later on once it's all finished. But royalty-free just means that they're allowing people to use it in whatever way you need to. And then I'm actually going to show a little Google Suite sharing copy because a lot of times you're sharing a document and then you don't want somebody to actually edit it. The master document, especially now I'm finding that there's virtual tools I'm giving people and I don't want them to mess with the master. And so I force them to copy. And so I'm going to show that in a second about how you could do that. And so Google is has an amazing set of tools. I know that as a university, you have access to all of those. You have a Gmail account, specifically UConn based. And so I'm going to tell you, find ways to use Google as much as possible because it makes life easier. I know that I am constantly sharing with my student staff all different ways of using Google. And so I would say use that virtually because you could share it, people could edit at the same time, you could access it, you could then send it off to somebody else. Like I'll be able to download this presentation and send it to you via Google. And so I would say that virtually Google Suite has been a godsend in the virtual world. And then we've already kind of covered a handful of the Zoom tools, but I'm going to tell you that you're going to need to navigate them yourselves and figure out what works for you. Whether that's doing breakout rooms, using annotation. I know that specifically Zoom has their own whiteboard too that you could then use that just turns the screen blank and people could write on it. But there's also online free whiteboards out there. And so think about what's the method that you want people to interact in your facilitation. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to share, right? So you should see this Google document, right, with a bunch of colorful circles. This is just something that we use to basically force some larger scale experiences. So if we have a 100-person virtual group, it's really hard to individualize that and move people around. So we use dots, like take a dot at your dot. But the thing is, right now, when I share it, it allows anybody who has this link to edit this specific document. But if I just go to this little hash right here and type copy, it forces anybody with the link with that slash and copy to make a copy into their own Google account. And so if I have a master document, that means they are never going to mess with that master document. If I link just the copy part, then they're just going to make a copy in their own Google, if it works. Right? And so now, it's as you can see at the top left of the screen, it says copy of the large-scale Icebreakers main. And so that's just, if you don't typically share a lot, I know virtually you're going to maybe start doing that more often. If you know that your group is going to also be a very large group, I've learned that if there's more than 40 people on this, it might crash. But there's a way around that, and that is by, where is it? Publish to web. When you publish the web, it creates space online. I don't know the full software backend process, but there's probably some cloud computing in there. But basically it says that's accessible online. You now have a link in which is now published, and you could share that, right? So we're going to stop sharing. I'm going to chat with you, throw this in chat. And you should now be able to access that specific document. But because it's now published to the web, sorry, I sent that privately. There you go. And so now that it's published to the web, it has more availability for more people to access it at the same time. And so typically, feel free to use this in your own space, but I would ask a question. Cats on the left, dogs on the right, and they would move their circle on their thing. Night or day, or is it, would you rather go to the beach or go to the mountains for vacation? And so that's just one way of doing kind of like a small, larger scale icebreaker. You'd actually have people write their names if you want them. Or with the big circle, you could also have people say, kind of like Winds in the Willow, step in if, and it's almost showcasing everybody has done this before. Have you ever facilitated virtually? Step in if you did. Don't step in if you don't, right? So just some tools, and feel free to use that if you're ever going to facilitate something like this. But I wanted to really share the process of copying master documents, because I think all too often we're sharing a lot of Google things, and sometimes you don't want people to edit them. And I know that we're right up to about 2 minutes until we end. And so I'll hang out for a little bit longer. That's the last big piece of some tools and mechanisms for virtual facilitation. I hope that you extracted some learning from this and you could reflect on some of the concepts or maybe some of the tools. But I really encourage you to navigate Zoom, navigate WebEx, or whatever tools you're going to be using on a regular basis, so you get comfortable in the settings, comfortable in how you're going to use it, and how you're going to kind of basically run your own facilitations. All right. Well, thanks for coming. For those who just said they need to head out, have a good class. But I'll hang out. If anybody has any questions, feel free to pop off your mic and ask away. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you. This is really helpful.
That's good. And this will be uploaded at some point. So if you want to come back for some reason and see my face, don't know why, you will have the option.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.